kids that I treated that died, they came in as the only survivor of their entire family group.
50 or 60% of buildings are completely destroyed. Most of the rest are seriously damaged. There's no water infrastructure. There's no sewage. Literally every sewage plant has been destroyed.
Mothers who just gave birth could not breastfeed.
Oxfam estimates right now that there's one toilet for every 4,000 people there. I was in Gaza for 14 days and I saw 13 kids shot in the head.
We are joined today by Feroz Sidwa, a trauma surgeon, Asma Taha, a pediatric nurse practitioner, and Monica Johnston, adult and pediatric care nurse. They're with us to discuss some of their experiences while they were in Gaza, and also about a recent letter that they signed with, I believe, 96 other doctors to the Biden administration about dealing with these things and the things they saw and experienced. So I want to thank all three of you guys for not just joining us today, but for your much needed work in the region and abroad, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine. So Feroz, I wanted to start with you because I know that if I'm correct, at least, you kind of headed up the getting things together for the letter, and you detail in it how the death toll of the conflict is likely greater than 118,000, which is over 5% of the Gazan population, which is both horrendous and historic to happen in just a year. So could you kind of go into the death toll and maybe what kind of reporting and such brought you to these figures? Was it similar maybe to the methodology that Lancet reporting used, or just, how did you get there?
So the Gaza Ministry of Health numbers that are reported on a daily or sometimes less frequent basis, those are people who are confirmed and known to have been killed by military violence in Gaza. That's it. It does not include anybody who has died of an infectious disease, of starvation-related causes, of simple displacement-related causes, of exacerbation of a chronic disease that would be normally easily treated in any normal place, even in the third world, even in a very poor country. So what we attempted to do was put all of those together. And now, somebody might say, well, that's not fair. You don't count people that, I don't know, in World War II or something, if a German starved while the U.S. was bombing Germany, you don't count that as a war death. That's not fair. And that's a good point. But in this case, it's different because Israel has announced, I shouldn't say Israel has announced, the whole world other than the U.S. and Israel acknowledges that Israel is deliberately starving the population of Gaza. That's hardly, it's not some secret. Human Rights Watch says it. Oxfam says it. Senator Van Hollen says it. It's not some fringe position. So, and for the Israelis kind of barely try to hide it anyway. Like if you read Giora Eiland, who's the former head of the National Security Council and currently a kind of a consultant to the War Cabinet, he writes stuff mostly in Hebrew and Yediot Ahronos all the time, saying epidemics would be good. We should tell I'm almost quoting him. We should tell the population of Gaza that they have two choices: stay and starve or leave. Asma and Monica can attest to this. A lot of the people you see that were killed, they were injured or they were killed in blasts that just shredded them. I mean, they're not even recognizable as human beings anywhere. There's no way they're ever going to be identified. But anyway, so that's the death toll from violence. Now, the death toll from starvation-related causes is a very uncertain thing to estimate. So what I did was I took the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification reports. They're from, if I'm remembering correctly, January, March, and May. And the IPC, as it's shortened to, is the technical group that monitors food insecurity, major food insecurity problems in the world, what most people would call famine. And they, if you look at their reports, you can see the number of people that they classified into the worst phase of food insecurity, which is called catastrophe, and the second worst phase, which is called emergency, if I'm remembering correctly, I'm pretty sure. And if you just take the numbers that they gave, both the estimates from the previous few weeks, whenever they put out the report, and then the projection through the next usually month or two, you can come up with a likely number of people that have, or actually, excuse me, not a likely, a minimum number of people that if their projections were correct, that would have died of starvation. Because in the catastrophe phase, people die at a minimum of 2 people per 10,000 of population per day. And in the emergency, it's a minimum of 1 per person, 1 per 10,000 people per day. So adjusting for the population of Gaza and adjusting for how many days are in each period, you can come up with a number. And if I'm remembering correctly, forgive me if I'm not exactly correct, I think it was 62,000. What we came up with was the most conservative estimate possible, given the available data. I sincerely hope that the number of starvation deaths is just wrong. I hope and pray that it has not been anywhere near that many people. And Monica and Asma can talk more about this. If it's not, if that many people do not turn out to have died, and by the way, this would mostly be small children who would have died of starvation, children under 5, because there just aren't that many elderly people in the population. But if that doesn't turn out to be if it doesn't turn out to be the case that there's been 62,000 or more deaths from starvation, it will purely and only be because of the unbelievably incredible level of sharing that the people of Gaza have instituted, of how to ration food, how to prioritize children to keep them alive, which I think we all probably saw with our own eyes.
Yeah, definitely. And Monica, in the New York Times piece that Feroz brought up here briefly, you're quoted in there talking about things such as like having to clean stool with cotton balls because of lack of adequate supplies. Could you maybe explain the state of medical supplies in your experience when you were there and how that could have hindered different operations or procedures you were trying to carry out?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first entrance into the ICU, I walk in and, I plan to wash my hands, put on some gloves and, start seeing patients. Well, they have no soap, no hand sanitizer. So, we did bring our own small supply that we carried with us. So I utilized that. So from literally everything, bed sheets to put patients on, I'm a burn nurse. So, burn patients have a lot of insensible loss. So their beds would be, half an inch full of liquid just from the loss from, the open wounds. And we have them on these plastic sheets that every time you try to move them on, they just rip and break. And so we had a roll of plastic sheets that we used. Other than that, we had nothing to keep them clean, warm, and dry on. Food. So a patient that has a breathing tube in often has a feeding tube in to help keep them, nutritionally balanced, especially a burn patient. Their caloric intake rises so high due to the metabolic response. And we were lucky if we could get maybe 1 can of Ensure for a patient a day. And that was very rare. Like we had to beg, borrow, steal just to get that one for the day.
How much would they get? How much would they get in the US, Monica?
Oh, usually they'd get about 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day. So 1 can of Ensure is maybe 180 calories. So an average burn patient with a 40% burn you're looking at about 4,000 calories a day.
So you had an order of magnitude less than you would normally.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, good comparison there. And then other supplies, just like IV caps. So I'd have large bore IVs in patients that had no caps on the end. So it's a vessel for infection. And then you're looking at pain medicine. We had no pain medicine, or we would run out of it and have to go to something else. We would have no medicine to maintain a patient's blood pressure. So if they can't maintain it, usually we have multiple medications we can work from to keep their blood pressure up. And it was like a slow death for everybody because, as you see the syringe slowly emptying, you don't have another one to replace it. So it was quite devastating to try to provide help and just know what needs to be done, but not have any of the supplies to do it.
And Asma, I'm sure the situation with supplies was at least somewhat or pretty similar in your experience as well. I'm curious if dealing with, newborns and children, did this lead to a lot of like unnecessary or preventable sickness or complications that otherwise you could have just treated?
Absolutely. It led to a lot of sickness, a lot of dehydration and malnutrition that also led to death. I can tell you every single day we will have a baby that died in a tent somewhere, either brought by the parents or brought by the grandparents. Women were giving birth full term to children who are born healthy, sent home to what we call home in here, but those people were sent to tents. And those tents were crowded with multiple people from the neighborhoods and the family members, etc. And then those women did not have access to clean water or to proper nutrition. Everybody was rationing how much food they can eat, how much water they can drink. And also the water that was available, it was contaminated water. It's not a clean water. So therefore, like, mothers who just gave birth could not breastfeed. So they could not breastfeed because they are themselves dehydrated. They are themselves not fed well. Plus, like the situation with living in a tent, like where privacy is not there, it's kind of created a very harsh environment in those moms to be able to care for their children. So as a result, those kids were not breastfed, they were dehydrated. And to find formula, like every single day, we will have a barrage of people coming to the neonatal ICU begging for a can of formula so that they can feed their kids. And again, every single day, we have a child who come in basically brought in dead because they are very dehydrated. As a result of the contaminated water and lack of food, many people suffered ongoing diarrhea, which also did not help. Like, you did not have enough food intake to start with, and now you are losing a lot of a fluid and a lot of a nutrition. And so that's kind of like you're setting people up for just dying because of lack of water and lack of fluid and nutrition.
I'm curious how these kind of physical and even emotional tolls from malnutrition to, I'm sure, just effects from trauma affected your ability to operate on patients. And then is it comparable to kind of any environment that you've ever been in or had to work in before?
Well, I can tell you it is awful. I can't even eat one single meal right now without being feeling guilty and feeling privileged. I have volunteered in Afghanistan in 2005, and I have seen sick people. I never seen this. I never seen this. Yeah.
And that's just
The
sad
fact that you are
reality.
able to starve children, to starve newborns, to starve mothers, like I feel like, where is the humanity in all this? Like, you are not talking about people, soldiers fighting you in war. You are basically looking at women and children who did nothing to deserve such treatment. Like to see your own kid die in front of you because you can't feed them. I feel like there is no more torture than that.
Yeah, it is a really horrendous kind of collective punishment that is surprising to a lot of people to hear, that things that you would imagine reading about like in history books or textbooks or in stories is like actually happening today on the ground. Feroz, I do have a question for you that last time we spoke, we did briefly cover, but now we have reports from like USAID that Israel is indeed withholding aid from Gaza. Oxfam has reported that half of the trucks needed to supply the quantity of aid needed, only half of them are getting in. So civilians living on less of the daily calorie intake than is in a can of beans at times. Was this the reality when you were there as well? Were people able to get access to the food, the water, whatever they needed? Like these everyday things that in America, I'm sure we can take for granted. Were they readily available at all when you were there?
So when I was there in March and April, and I was in Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis hadn't been destroyed yet. So at that time, aid was getting into the south, and this is one of the things that's very confusing to people. Israel has repeatedly evacuated every part of Gaza, like multiple different times, and they're literally just, Gaza's like this big, so they're just shuffling people back and forth, back and forth. Right now, the western edge of Gaza is called the Mawasi. It's basically the beach of the Mediterranean Sea. That is just like any beach anywhere else. There's nothing there because you can't build on sand. Right now, just getting like, building on what Asma said, there's one, Oxfam estimates right now that there's one toilet for every 4,000 people there. It's completely insane. I mean, obviously that's going to lead to humongous problems with infection. But then you add on top of that that there's no clean water, that nobody can eat enough, so their immune system doesn't work, and that the overcrowding. I mean, Gaza was already one of the most crowded places in the world. Mawasi is now literally the most crowded place in the world, and by an order of magnitude. There's nothing that even remotely compares. Like not downtown Tokyo, not anything else. The Mawasi area is the size of LAX. Like it's about 11 square kilometers if I'm remembering correctly, but it's about the size of Los Angeles International Airport. There's 500,000 people in it right now. There might actually be 1 million people in it. It's very hard to actually tell, So, and yeah, and the Israelis started the war. I keep saying the Israelis, but really the U.S. and Israel started the war in the north. They destroyed Gaza City, they destroyed Deir al-Balah, and basically everything north of Wadi Gaza, which was the most built-up area of the Strip. There's kind of a relatively uninhabitable area between there and Khan Yunis. The Israelis then destroyed Khan Yunis, and then when they were done with that, they went and destroyed Rafah. So literally the entire place has been destroyed. I mean, it's only the size of metropolitan Philadelphia to begin with. And it's been under the most intense bombardment that the world has ever seen by a huge margin for a year. The whole place is gone. 50 or 60% of buildings are completely destroyed. I know most of the rest are seriously damaged. There's no water infrastructure. There's no sewage. Literally every sewage plant has been destroyed. So yeah, I mean, it's just a total and utter disaster. But this ends up being confusing for people because they read in the news, oh, people are now the food situation is better in the north than it was in the south, and then a few weeks later, people are going back to the north and the south is under attack again. So now the food situation's bad there, and what they're not realizing is that the food situation in both places is continuously worsening. And it's just sometimes that's better. Sometimes the Israelis allow a little bit more humanitarian access in the south. Sometimes they allow a little bit more in the north. It's probably just to encourage people to flow in one direction or the other. But you're talking about people who've literally been displaced 12 times now, and they've been living outside for a year. Like you said, they've seen their children die, they've seen their neighbors die, they've seen their family members die. I can't. Do you guys remember? I think the Ministry of Health released, I think something like 900 some hundreds, like nearly 1,000 families have been completely obliterated. Like literally, there isn't a single surviving family member in Gaza. And then there's another several hundred that have one surviving family member. This is the level of violence that we're talking about. It's really quite incredible.
So for this next part, however, I guess silly it might sound, I'm going to feel like a bit of a school teacher asking this or having you do this in this way. But I want to ask two questions kind of side by side to put in comparison the reality of some of the things you guys talk about in your paper versus, I don't know, like talking points, myths, whatever the word may be, that people spread oftentimes to try and justify these things. So when I asked them, if you guys could just maybe by like show of hands, right? If the answer is yes, like just raise your hand. If it's no, don't raise your hands. Like we'll pretend we're in school again, right? So the first question is, how many of you guys, or which ones of you guys, when you were in Gaza, either firsthand saw or heard of a child who had been a victim of a bullet wound that had been shot in one way or the other? Okay, and then the other question, again, to kind of put that side by side with talking points that you hear, how many of you witnessed Hamas in the hospitals while you were there with patients or whatever duties you were doing? Yeah, and that's just something I wanted to be sure to put forth for everyone, because you hear about children getting shot, you hear about these things, and it really puts into perspective the horrendous actions that are going on a daily basis. Feroz, I know last time we spoke, you specifically went into this, and Asma, you can feel free to chime in maybe with something that you saw as well. How frequent were these children victims that you guys saw, children getting shot? How frequent of a thing was that for you guys?
Go for it, Asma.
Well, I can tell you daily in a way or another, because like even if you did not get shot today, you are in the hospital for several days, and we saw those kids and young adults, they are all in wards that basically you don't have a private rooms for people, so they are all in spaces where all beds line next to each other. So I have witnessed this every single day.
Yeah, so when I was in Gaza for 14 days and I saw 13 kids shot in the head that I recorded in my journal. And what I want people to realize is that I'm a trauma surgeon. In the United States, I would be called for anybody who's been shot in the head, but not there. There, the kid just gets brought into the ER. And if I happened to be there, which I was a lot of the time, because that's where I was mostly working, if I was there, then I saw the kid right when they got there. But if I wasn't, then I just happened to find them in the ICU the next day, for example. That was, I think, I can't remember what percentage of them that I found, but it was probably about half. I just found in the ICU the next day. But there were plenty of kids that came in shot in the head that were just pronounced dead and sent to the morgue. Because children have small heads, just smaller brains, smaller faces, smaller necks, smaller cervical spines. They're not going to survive military grade bullet wounds to the head very often. So the 13 that I saw in 14 days were that doesn't mean 13 showed up to the hospital in those days. It means at least 13 showed up to the hospital in those days. And pretty much everybody who's worked in an emergency room in Gaza has had the same experience.
And Monica, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so I was in the ICU primarily, and then we also had a wound care clinic. And in our adult ICUs, we had at least one child in there at all times. And the wounds that I saw were extensive blast injuries and burns. I personally didn't spend a lot of time in the ER, so I didn't deal with those incidences of the children and gunshot wounds. None of them made it up to the ICU.
I have one more question, in my opinion, that's kind of nonsensical, but the last time I did one of these interviews with the doctor, this was a comment that I saw from a few people, actually through the couple conversations I've had. I've seen this a few times, so I want to at least ask it to kind of dispel myths. I don't really know who to pose the question to. Any one of you can feel free to jump in. You can shake your heads, whatever the answer may be. Last time I did one of these videos, a comment that I saw was that doctors have to coordinate with Hamas and they're told what they can speak on, what they can't speak on. Was that reality for any of you guys?
Who the hell told you that?
Well, yeah, no, and that's what I said, and I was also like, how would that be enforceable? How would that be, like anything? Like, how are they going to do this? So I know it's a silly one. Had to at least get it out there because I want it on record that this is just a crazy idea.
Yeah, I know that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life. Asma, were you how many Hamas people told you not to talk about all the kids they're shooting in the head when you got back?
Well, I don't want to make a joke of this because it's kind of like really silly, but all the people that we have worked with, either providers, nurses, parents, family members, everybody is normal people like us, people who really want to take care of their families, raise their children. Everybody is praying every single minute for this war to stop. Those people have been through multiple wars and multiple attacks on Gaza, but none of those attacks have lasted that long. And people every single minute were hoping and praying for a ceasefire. None of the people in Gaza love life. They love to enjoy their families, they love to enjoy their kids, and they were deprived or, they did not sign up for this.
And I guess, quickly, Monica, you as well, you're not restrained on what you can and can't say, are you?
I don't even really understand how that could benefit them, from Hamas. It doesn't even make sense. That's why I'm sitting here with a look on my face.
The argument that people, I know what they're saying, I'm just being facetious, but the argument that people are saying is that Hamas is shooting these kids and they're telling us not to say anything about it. It's just without believing the most racist nonsense that you can possibly imagine. One thing that's funny is there is this, and this is kind of where you see the utility of stereotypes and dehumanization of people. One of the stereotypes of Palestinians in the U.S., especially probably in Europe too, is that they don't care if their kids die. You see this all the time. They send their kids to be suicide bombers, and their kids are human shields, and their kids are this and that. When you're there, and I mean, I'm not Arab, I'm not Palestinian, I'm not Muslim, I don't speak Arabic, but it's actually kind of hard when you're there not to notice how opposite the situation is to what you're told. And I've lived in the West Bank, I've lived in Israel, I've spent a lot of time with Palestinians, but Gaza, the Palestinians of Gaza were, I would say, almost pathologically attached to their children. That they love them so much, and they just like you would think with I mean, at least, what is the number recently? Like 16,000 children have been killed
Mhm.
in the past year. No, are known to have been killed through violence. You know, it's kind of weird to me that people haven't become numb to it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm a trauma surgeon. I pronounce people dead all the time, but parents don't lose their actual children all the time. But it doesn't, that doesn't happen. They're still doing everything they can to try and keep their children alive. So the idea that Hamas, you know, the elected government of Gaza, you know, to be fair, elected a long time ago, but the government of Gaza could be walking around executing children and then just telling parents, okay, now go to the hospital and convince the doctors that it was actually the Israelis. It requires a level of dehumanization of people. And I'm sorry to make this analogy, but I think it's accurate, that I think you'd have to go back to the Nazis to find. I really think it's that bad. And I think anybody who makes that claim, I'm guessing it's mostly just Twitter bots that are making these claims, but it's just outrageous. It's not even, I know you asked because it's, you know, you want to get it out there and have people say it, but there are some things that I feel like I lose my humanity to discuss, and that's one of them.
Well, I apologize for asking.
No, you're doing the right thing. I'm just pointing out how extreme it's just such an insane allegation.
Yeah.
You know?
Asma, do you want to jump in?
You know, actually, this fallacy have been around for almost 75 years, if not more.
Yeah.
This is started when Golda Meir was a vice president of or prime ministers of Israel. And basically, she always used the statement that Palestinians do not love their children. That's why they basically make them as a human shield, or basically that's why they are resisting. So she had that seed planted since then. And same like with Feroz, I have volunteered in the West Bank and Gaza more than 40 times before this war. And to be honest with you, the first time I went to Gaza, I was skeptical myself, but the mercy, the love, the kindness, the community that I have seen in Gaza, I never seen anywhere else in the Middle East, in the world, even in the West Bank, which is like a few miles away from them.
So, Monica, also in this New York Times piece that was released today, you describe how nearly all the children that were admitted in your time ended up dying one way or the other, I'm sure. Could you kind of expand on the sort of mortality rate that you experienced from what I'm sure in other circumstances would be largely preventable, and the effect that not only it had on you treating patients, but on family and like their siblings and these kinds of things?
Yeah, I'll touch on that first, the family and the siblings. All the kids that I treated that died, they came in as the only survivor of their entire family group. So, you know, you're trying to provide, I mean, they're intubated, they're sedated as best we can, but you're trying to be that everything for them, their savior, and, you know, and we couldn't, and that was devastating. So, you know, they would have not only extensive burns, but little blast injuries that tunneled throughout their body. One had a hole in his lung because of that tunneling. And after he passed away, we actually thought that there might have been some shrapnel up into his brain from his nasal cavity. I mean, the bombing is just so extensive, not only just from the burns, it penetrates the body. And then being unable to provide wound care, which leads to infection, which leads to ultimately their death, the organ failure, and you know, they just don't have anything. They don't have the nutrition, they don't have the ability to stay clean, warm, dry, and then the medications to support them during that critical stage. So it was, you know, after my second child that died and me not being able to provide the wound care, which was my purpose for being there, because we ran out of supplies, I I felt very helpless and hopeless. And, I even went back to the room and I'm like, what are we even doing? But every single time I walked back to the hospital, the people reminded me what I'm doing, to see the smiles on their faces, the thank yous. Thank you that you did not forget about us. Thank you that the world may still be caring for us and thinking about us. So they uplifted me, but they were saying I was uplifting them. So it was this reciprocal event, and it was beautiful, and it's what helped me get through all the tragic cases I saw.
I'm glad that there was at least, some light in what I'm sure was very dark experiences to have. Asma, I'm sure that being in pediatrics, also dealing with children, that you had circumstances that were pretty similar. How often was it for you that you would maybe like discharge a family with a newborn or even an older child, and they would have to return just shortly after?
Often. And I want to mention you one more thing. Like, we had 5 babies in the neonatal ICU that they were evacuated by a physician. Yusuf, he evacuated them from another hospital when the Israelis enter from Kamal Adwan. So he brings those 5 kids in an ambulance, and those kids now in this unit and have no family. And their families are killed, nowhere to be found. And the local nurses and the other parents who are basically their children are admitted in the unit, we are passing those kids around to have someone hold them, to have someone basically feed them. And even they did not have clothes. Like, because like usually in neonatal ICU, you have the kids in an incubator. So, luckily we brought baby clothes with us. So those what we were addressing those kids with. Um, but like, having children who are since birth, no parents was able to hold them, feed them, touch them. I thought like this is also was very devastating. Um, yeah.
So I have 2 more questions, both of which I wanted to pose to all 3 of you guys, one at a time. Don't be fighting over each other to answer. No, I'm just kidding. But the first one, my viewers will be very familiar with, because I try to ask this to everyone I've spoken to that has been on the ground in Gaza, and I didn't get a chance to ask Feroz this last time we spoke. So maybe we could start with him. On my channel, I've been very clear that I think what's happening in Gaza constitutes genocide. I know for different reasons, some people want to stray away from using that term for one thing or another. So I want to pose the question just in terms of like the destitution, the death, the destruction. What does this feel like when you're on the ground? Like, what is the day-to-day experience there? Like, how does this materialize when you're actually in it and experiencing it? And you could go first, Feroz, if you want.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think there's two different things to talk about when somebody asks. Like, it's like it's almost like the word famine, right? If you go like I'm in a hotel, if I go to the guy next door and say, "Hey, bro, what's a famine?" He's going to say, "Oh, that's when people die because they don't have enough food to eat," right? That's actually the third level of food insecurity in the IPC classification. Famine is you have to go up 2 more levels, and it has to involve the entire society to a certain degree. So like there's the technical classification, but then there's what people think when they hear the term. In the way that people think when they hear the term, yeah, Gaza is certainly in famine. In the IPC's technical definition, it's not. But that's a different matter. And I think it's the same thing with genocide. There's the legal determination, right? Like the International Court of Justice has agreed to hear the case, to keep investigating it. And that's going to take years. So I guess we'll find out how independent these mechanisms actually are. And to be fair, the ICJ has comported itself honorably in the case of the Israel-Palestine conflict. The International Criminal Court's a different matter, but so it's hard to know. But I think if you look at the people, I don't think my determination of that question is irrelevant. But if you look at the people who do actually know something about this, they are almost universally in agreement that it does constitute genocide. There was actually an interesting, just because I had a New York Times article published today, might as well give the Times some shit. The New York Times published an op-ed by Omer Bartov, who's an Israeli-American Holocaust scholar, very well-respected guy, very sensible guy, good scholar, and an honest fellow, no doubt. Former Israeli soldier, just like every other Israeli. So and that was in, I think, November of 2023, just in other words, a month into this attack. And he said at the time that the Israelis are making clearly genocidal statements, but he wasn't sure that the attack itself was genocidal. So he said, I can't say right now it's genocide. A few months later, he had changed his mind. Now he did think it was genocidal. But guess where he published that piece? In The Guardian. Forget genocide. It's a whole shitload of unnecessary killing. How's that? Like, it's either way, it's bad enough to stop, and it's something that we should not be involved in at all.
So I guess, Monica, did you have anything you could add from your perspective just about the experience, the sights, the feels of being there day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. When I put together one of my presentations, my biggest themes were the hopelessness and helplessness of it, but you go there and the people are so resilient, and they do not have much food, but they would bring what they have and try to feed me while I was there. Like, their hearts are just so big and beautiful. And it was just insane. Secondly, I can't think of any patients that I took care of that might have been a Hamas militant. So if we're, in one of my posts, somebody commented, well, what do you think? War is ugly. Like, this is war, and war is ugly. Okay, so we talk about the collateral damage of the women, the children, and even the men who I had a hard time believing might have been militants. So that's the collateral damage. Well, then let us treat that collateral damage. If you say that's not your targeted purpose, then let us treat them. We were running out of supplies, and then I was there when Rafah border got closed, and we could not get new supplies in. And then every subsequent team after us was banned from taking in any supplies. So you're just a shell of a person there trying to provide aid with no supplies to save these people. So to me, that sounds very deliberate. Like, you're trying to prevent, the healing of what you say is collateral damage. So I have a lot of anger with that. I'm sure many people do, but there was many times while I was on the ground there that I just being unable to understand this just it created this rage inside of me. But then I would walk past the people who just smile at me and were just like, we just want to go back to our homes. And I'm like, okay, be the bigger person here. So that's what it felt like on the ground.
And Asma, I would love to get your take on this as well.
So I can tell you, I don't call it genocide. I call it a second Holocaust. Looking at the amount of destruction, the death, the famine, the obstruction of all kinds of aids, from healthcare resources to food, to water, to all basic human needs. I have read stories about the Holocaust, and I have tried to basically make them available for my kids. So hopefully we learn from the history so we become better human. But what's being inflicted on Palestinians who are living in Gaza and now in Lebanon is beyond a genocide.
Yeah, very well put from all three of you. So the last question I want to ask, and we'll start with you, Asma, since we went to you last on the last one, and then Feroz, I know you kind of headed up the letter, so we'll go to you last on this, give you the last word. What was each of your personal motivation behind signing the letter? I'm sure we've covered a lot of those through this discussion, but just to kind of sum up the personal motivation for you to sign on to a letter that would be going to the Biden administration, and what would your message to them be, say they were listening or watching this right now?
Well, unfortunately, we were the witness of what's going on in Palestine and Gaza to those women and children and men who basically did nothing wrong. But we witnessed the destruction, the displacement, the death of total families to death of your own kids. So I felt the least thing that I can do is to bring this back to people in power and share that with them. They did not get to witness this themselves firsthand. I wish that President Biden would have taken a visit and seen for himself, for his eyes. But unfortunately, they did not. And as an American citizen, I feel like, we got to witness this, and it's time to share it, to bring it to the people who could not go across the globe to see what's going on.
And then Monica, same question to you.
Yeah, so I was motivated to sign just so that it's documented and recorded that they have this information and they can't say we didn't know. So that was my motivation. I was listening to some other podcasts and somebody said dead men have boys and boys grow up to be angrier and more resentful. So I want to say to them, like, I don't understand. They believe Israel has a right to protect themselves. Absolutely. Everybody does. But at what point and what cost do you take that? How do you come back from something like this, the destruction, the new generation that's just going to resent and hate you? How do you come back from that? And we need to be a leader to stop that and say we need to come to a resolution and just stop.
Yeah, and then same question to you, Feroz, motivation behind signing, and for you, I guess, rounding up other doctors that feel likewise, and what would your message be, or the message you hope is received from the letter?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess maybe a few things. Like one was exactly like Monica said. I don't want anybody to be able to claim that these people didn't know what was going on. I mean, I know they already know everything that we said in the letter. They're, American intelligence, Israeli intelligence are quite good. It's not some secret that Israel is shooting kids, is bombing the whole place, is destroying the whole place, is starving the whole place. None of this is secret. But still, I felt like, since, like Osmo said, we did witness it, had an obligation to just put it on paper. And I think the term is a little cheesy, but we are privileged people. Like I'm not Palestinian, I'm not Muslim, I'm not Arab, I'm not Jewish, I'm not Israeli. I have absolutely no connection to this conflict in any like organic way. I just approach it as an American, and for me, and I honestly don't really care about the Palestinian cause as a political cause. That's not interesting to me at all. I don't care where the borders of Israel or Palestine are. But I don't want my government involved in these crimes. I don't want my money involved in these crimes. I don't want the government that I live under doing crazy stuff like this. This is insane. This is not an Israeli attack on Gaza. This is a U.S. Israeli attack on Gaza. It's American planes, American bombs, American munitions, American jet fuel, American logistical support, and Israeli pilots and soldiers. It's not, they're not separate things. We're not complicit in it. We're directly doing it. We're the ones doing it, and we shouldn't have any illusions about that. And so I think that needs to be brought to the forefront. And I think it's important to push the political system as far as you can to see what it can do and what it can't. One thing that I realized at some point between the first and second letters, because we sent a similar letter in July. One thing that I realized in that time is, which I guess was kind of obvious, but still, we actually don't have a mainstream American political party, Democrats or Republicans, for which genocide is just a deal breaker. We don't have one that's opposed to genocide on principle. That's terrifying. The U.S. is an incredibly powerful, militarily, it's just overwhelmingly powerful nuclear armed state that's trying to run the whole world by force. There's no limits on it right now, and that's what the Israelis are proving. Because again, it's just what Israel is doing is just, it's what we and them are doing together. And this, it's in tiny little Gaza right now, but there's no reason to think it won't eventually spread to other places. And it's a very, very scary world this is opening up. And I think it needs to be opposed in any way that can be done. And this is the way I can figure out.
Yeah, and for anyone that is listening and is interested, I will have the letter linked in the description so you guys can read it yourselves. I want to again thank all three of you, not just for helping to shed light on something I think very much needs more light shed on it, especially as it kind of falls out of mainstream media cycles, but for, so to speak, seeing the fire and running towards it and being, brave enough and willing to help people who are very much in need.
Thanks, Brendan.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And so, yeah, and so the pleasure was all mine. I really appreciate it. And I hope all of you enjoy the rest of your day or night, depending on which time zone you're in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. Nice talking to you again.
Awesome. Yep. See you guys.